Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and we have today Miss Chelsey Harrington. She is a parent and family life coach, and I saw her on Instagram. We messaged back and forth a little bit. She was posting some awesome stuff and things about what she does in her field and area. And so we kind of messaged back and forth, and you know, you guys know I like to just have people on here to talk about some of the hard topics that I think we're all wrestling with and juggling with, and trying to figure out, how do we parent? How do we live in this world that we live in 2023 with all the trauma and all the education and all the buzzwords that are floating around, but also with the long history of kind of beliefs and you know, good and bad roots of parenting. And so anyway, I just want her to come on and talk about this stuff. So Chelsey, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the team, and let's have a good conversation going. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, thank you, Clint. I'm so excited to be here. Likewise, I love what you do. Love your work. Love that I connected with you on social media. As you said, my name's Chelsey Harrington. I am a parent and family coach. I have a pediatric occupational therapy background. I worked as a pediatric occupational therapy assistant for several years. Had my son, my one and only child, 5 years ago. All of these, you know, working in occupational therapy, having my own child, suffering through some postpartum depression stuff, starting therapy, healing a lot of childhood stuff that came up really early on from when he was a baby. And then just my parenting journey, I felt really called to share with other parents my journey and being transparent, and took some courses. I took Dr. Sears. He's a beloved pediatrician. He's written a lot of books. I took his health coaching course. And so that, and then the merriment of some parent coaching classes and courses that I've taken. And then my occupational therapy background is kind of all coming together to be a coach and to help families with things. So
that's awesome. And you live where?
Yeah. Arkansas,
That's
Central
right.
Arkansas.
All right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So really it was, what did you do? So you were OT before, then you had a baby.
Mm-hmm. OTA.
Okay. And that was 5 years ago, you said?
Well, my son was born 5 years ago. I had been doing OT before that. So, and then but then the pandemic hit. So I was home with him, and I haven't done traditional OT in about 3 years.
Gotcha.
So I've been in the coaching space.
Yeah. It's interesting how having kids, right, brings up all of our own stuff that maybe we didn't know we had, or we never really got to deal with. And then we start trying to parent and love this little baby. And man, the countertransference and the stuff that it brings up in us is a lot.
It hit me like a train. I mean, all the things that we are conditioned to believe that motherhood is supposed to be like, I had the opposite experience. I mean, I was dealing with the mental health issues of just having depression, postpartum depression, but then I was dealing with, like, he would cry and just, I would become so reactive. And there was all these things that happened those first couple of years. My depression lasted about 3 years. But through therapy, I was able to heal a lot of that, but it took me by surprise because I didn't understand what was happening in my body. And of course, now I know that there was probably some things that happened when I was a baby. I had colic. My parents were young. I was the first child that they had. And I just, and I saw everybody else was just like, it seemed like I was the only one that was dealing with this. You know, it's like, why is it so easy for somebody to take their baby and go to the store? I mean, I don't think I left the house with him without support for like 2 years because I was just so anxious and scared to do anything. And I realized it wasn't normal, and so I got help. But
it's your reality too at the same time. You know, I think that's the other thing is like trying to strike a balance. It's a big conversation. we all have, I have kids with some allergies and sensory issues and special needs. And when we were going through the same thing, yes, from an outsider's perspective, and even at my best self, could we have managed that better, right? Had I been prepared and had skills and been more resilient and had support and understood what was going on, of course, quote unquote, I could have managed it better. But that's not how life happens, right? You get a baby, then you realize there's problems, then you're backfilling all the things you don't know. And so hindsight, you could say, oh, well, I could have been more calm. Some things weren't as big of a deal as I made them to be, quote unquote, or whatever. But there's no way to know that and have done that in the moment. And so it's real easy to look at another person and say, well, why do they do that? Or why are they freaking out? Or why are they overwhelmed? Or why don't they just take their baby to the park or stay up late or whatever the thing is that we kind of criticize other parents for. And it's like, well, it's not that simple. So I think for anybody in American culture, especially as individualized as we are, and as, I'm not going to speak to your parents, but when we come from families that didn't know how to do that didn't have the resources or tools, then we don't know how to do it. And then we're parenting in a world that is new, that didn't exist when our parents were parenting us. And there's all these new things. There's sensory disorders and autism and Asperger's and food allergies and, colic that are, yes, quote unquote, they've always existed, but not at the rate and level that we experience it now. And so it's just, it's wild.
Yeah. And I think one of the things to speak to that I really started, for me, this journey to becoming a coach, I just started kind of connecting dots on, I was doing traditional therapy, outpatient clinics, and I was going into schools. But I never learned, we talk about teaching kids how to self-regulate. I would have self-regulation goals for children. And I realized I don't know how to regulate myself.
Amen.
Why are we not training therapists, teachers, ourselves to, and so that really with my journey with therapy, I have a really, really wonderful therapist. And she has 40 years of experience or something crazy like that. And we just went back to the basics with me on emotional regulation. And I learned that so much of what our struggles are that we perceive when our kids are upset, even when you take it back to an infant crying, is we have so much power to co-regulate with them, but we have to be able to have those skills to do that. And so that's when I started being there's some missing pieces here, kind of when you look at traditional medical stuff, right? It's we're not really getting in the root. We're not getting to the root. And I became so passionate through my experience, my journey with therapy, to go, whoa. Most of the kids that we're seeing, way back in the day, pediatric OTs had a large, their caseload was made up of children with physical disabilities, right? Cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. Fast forward to the 2000s, most of the children on my caseload had neurodiversity like ADHD, autism, oppositional defiance disorder, which we can argue if that's even a thing. Yep. And so I figured out I'm a sensitive being and I'm a root cause kind of gal. I'm wait a second, why aren't we talking to the parents about how much these children are sleeping? What's their nutrition like? What is the parenting style? Because the parenting style can cause, oppositional defiance disorder. A child can become oppositional if a parent, not to blame the parent, but just if the parents don't have the tools. It's never about blaming the parent, but it's about what are we addressing here?
Yeah. So, well, that's an interesting. The blame thing is an interesting thing that I think comes with self-awareness and self-regulation. Right? Is that somebody can say, and this is a huge cultural problem. I mean, we're getting into cancel culture and all the things. You can say to someone, and I think this is a problem that within the Christian world, we have this kind of, only God can judge me. Tupac says this and the Christians say this, and so it's a weird, interesting dynamic. But I think that the problem with judgment is when you think judgment means I think less of your worth and value, right? So if I'm telling a parent, you didn't do this right, they hear, or you didn't do this in the best possible way, right? Which is a better way to say it. You didn't do this in the best possible way. It doesn't matter if you didn't have the resources and tools or if you just chose to do the wrong thing. to me, your worth and value doesn't change. You're still a worthy human. You're still doing the best you can with what you know. You still deserve reconciliation and healing and to learn to do better and to do better.
Yeah.
We have a culture, though, that hears, hey, you could have done this better as you're bad, you're terrible, you're an awful human being. And so I think on both ends, from a Christian perspective, we as Christ followers have done a bad job of that, of measuring people's behaviors and saying, well, you do these behaviors, so you're bad, which is literally the opposite of our ultimate teaching, which is God loves you unconditionally, not because of your behaviors, but because of who he says you are, which isn't based on your behaviors. And so it's just this crazy, and then the secular world's doing the same thing. It's like, so we can't, as coaches and therapists and OTs, it's really hard to help people when any way that you point out a flaw or a discrepancy or a way to do better gets met with, you're saying I'm awful, you're calling me out, you're saying I'm a bad parent, you're blaming me. And it's like, okay, well, you slapped your kid in the face, right? Yes, you were traumatized. Yes, you're doing better than your parents. Yes, there was a bad day and a hard day, and we all can accept that that was a one-time thing and you didn't mean to. And also, their behavior is going to be a consequence of that slap, and you're responsible for it. So blame is a hard word, but in some ways we have to learn to be able to take responsibility. And I think parents need to learn how to take responsibility without then heaping coals on their head and feeling all this shame. Does that make sense?
Right. And I think that's where I was getting frustrated. You know, with someone that has sensitivity, I crave honesty. Like, I just need you to be your full self. I can detect inauthenticity. I can detect somebody that's not authentic from a mile away. It just, I am designed to be authentic and vulnerable. Yeah. And we in these traditional settings, we're worried about hurting the parents' feelings, or, oh, that's outside of our scope. And it's not outside. In fact, I think, there are a lot of OTs that have gone on to add parent coaching to their, expertise. And because there is such a need, but it's a fine line between, and that's the thing that's why I say I am a parent coach for conscious caregivers, because you have to get out of that rigid state to be able to have the open mind to have compassion for yourself, to understand that these things happened, or you're parenting in a way that you're not super happy with, but it's not your fault. And you can have compassion for yourself, but you also have to have that growth mindset. And you can't be rigid still, like you were talking about, of like this rigidity, and that prevents us from having curiosity about things that are different than what we had originally believed. That's why spanking and physical punishment of kids is still such a big thing in the South, is because there is this very rigid mindset that goes against all the latest research. I mean, and just human nature. I mean, you don't make somebody feel bad for them to feel better. It just makes them feel worse, and, but I do think that's why that mindset issue is, really steeped still here in the South.
Absolutely.
And you have to try to be really mindful of that when I'm coaching parents, but they do have to kind of be in that next step for us to work together. Because I'm not interested in getting in an argument about, timeouts and physically punishing kids. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like you got to be ready to put that behind you.
Yeah, for sure. I think I hear what you're saying. I think I've gotten this way in life in general as a therapist, where, I love obviously there's nuance to it, but if you're just radically opposed to a certain technique or way of doing things, or therapy in general, it's not my job to talk you into it. And there are parents there's a long list of people who want to get help and who want to change things, and who are aware or evolved enough to go, hey, this thing in marriage is not working. My pornography that I'm looking at, or this thing that I'm doing is not helpful. Can you please help me? I'm not interested in someone coming in and being like, well, I don't think that's that bad. It's not really that big of a deal. Let me give you all the reasons why this thing's okay. And my wife or husband's just, being ridiculous. First session, I'm going to be like, I'm willing to work with you a few, sessions, but if you're not on board with this, like there's other people that can help you that can work with you. And I would say the same thing when it comes probably for you and any of the things that you do. It's like, yeah, there has to be an onboarding ramp to not spanking, not doing certain timeouts, not, feeding a certain way, not having a relationship with food that's a certain way, being willing to see you as the expert, right? As Christians, I would say, see you as the pastor, see you as the leader. Like, I'm not going to tell someone, I'm not going to argue with somebody theology or try to talk them into believing something if they don't see me as a person that they want to lead or be discipled by or with. And so that's a question you have to ask people is like, is this what you want? And if they say yes, then you're both agreeing to a particular thing.
Yeah. And I would say most parents, like, I don't know very many parents, as, especially moms that don't want to do, they want what's best for their kids. They want to do, better, and they want, support. And that's where you get into parents just really aren't supported in our culture, especially moms. And so there's this gap, where it's like, even with therapy, even with OT, it's like the kids, the parent drops the kid off and the kid goes into the room and they do, we sit at a table and we do handwriting and we do this and that. We may go into the gym and then we take them to the parent and then they leave. And I was like, especially when I became a parent and realized, oh my goodness, this is hard. But also our society makes some things a lot harder than they need to be. And that's one thing that I also became passionate about, was like, okay, it's already hard enough for parents and families in our society. Lots of hard things with modern parenting. Why are we then now putting all these extra pressures and things? So one of the things as a conscious parenting coach that I do is help parents like listen to that intuition, preserve that intuition, and say no to a lot of that extra stuff. All these pressures that to get our kids to do things before they're ready.
Can you give a couple examples?
Yeah, like everything, potty training, moving in, some of the big ones are potty training, moving the child into the toddler bed for some reason is always really, and I'm not trying to, it's just, it seems like it's these huge things.
So potty training, moving them into the toddler bed.
Yeah. Getting them to eat their vegetables.
Keep going. I know you got a list.
Getting them to behave well way before they're, getting them to not cry, getting them to not have meltdowns, making sure they know their ABCs before they go to kindergarten. I could probably go on list. And on. Those are the big ones but that I see all the time.
Yeah. And those are all developmental issues, right? Those are all things that parents and this is the sad part, parents without a psychological degree or a master's in marriage and family therapy or a family studies degree have no access to that information.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major theme over the last 30 years. Well, first of all, it's pretty new information. I mean, historically, right? I mean, it wasn't until 1958 that we even had the word parenting in the English language. That's insane.
Fascinating.
So like we were only, what is it, 2023? We're only 60 years out from even having that word in all of history.
Why?
Like I had to go back and look it up the other day because I'm writing that section in the book and I'm like, this is insane. So I put a graph and it shows like the English language and lexicon of when the word parent and parenting came in. And it's just like, so you have that, and then you have the science that, how could we study the brain and understand neurology and development and all these things up until the last 35 years? We just didn't have the technology to do it. And so that's why I have a lot, and I know you do too, have a lot of empathy for parents on like, this is not your fault. Like, you're not just trying to be a bad parent. We just didn't know any of these things. And,
Yeah.
and our whole society was different. We didn't have the ability to be therapeutic or be comforting or take time outs. Like if we didn't discipline and do what we needed to do, our kids were going to literally die. You know,
Yes.
if so I get why spanking was a thing for a long time. It's because
Yeah.
like if you don't listen and you go be a toddler, the wolf's going to eat you. You know, like you're
Yeah.
going to get the plague, you're going to get bit by a rattlesnake, like you're going to die of heat stroke or dysentery. Like, so I have to hit you because it's life or death.
Yeah.
And I feel like now we're still 40 years into, well, longer than that now, 70 years into, okay, now we have entertainment and comfort and medical things, and our kids are not always at risk for like the physical Maslow's hierarchy of needs, death and dying situations. Maybe we should
Yeah.
adjust enlightenment to the human condition and, working on emotional intelligence and these sort of things. So it's like this
Yeah.
list you give me: potty training, moving to the toddler bed, eating veggies, behaving well, not crying. It's like all of those were pressures I felt with our oldest from everybody. Let them cry it out. You're suffering for no reason. Let them cry it out.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes.
we were hysterical for like 2 years trying to figure out how to get this kid to sleep more than, literally 20 minutes and take more than 2 ounces of a breast milk. And I knew in my gut, based on what I know, like I'm not going to cry it out. I don't personally prescribe to that. I'm not saying there's not a time to do it or there's not a way to do it that's healthy. And I know we could talk about that forever. Just like I'm not saying if your kid is literally going to kill themselves or hurt somebody else, that giving them a pop on the butt or doing some kind of corporal punishment might be necessary if it's life or death or going to save their life. I'm not against that. What I'm against is people forcing you to do something in a non-developmental way just because that's the way it's always been done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So it's like potty training. I mean, we did the thing with my oldest where we did Skittles and we did rewards, and the school was like, he has to be potty trained to be able to wipe by 2.5 or he can't come to daycare. And I'm like, there's no way in all of hell that he's going to do this thing. And I did 3 weekends of like no pants on, pee and poop on the floor. None of it worked. About 3 weeks later, he just decided to do it and started potty training, and then we were good. My second boy, literally, I never once showed him the toilet. He peed and pooped just doing what his brother was doing, and we didn't have to potty train him at all. So it's like, it's insane to try to force a parent to to get in all this power struggle and make their child do it because the school or whoever is telling you, you must do it by this literal deadline.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry.
Yes.
I get on a tangent.
No, to everything that you're saying. And I think that is exactly it. I mean, I think, you hope to get the first time parents, on this, because usually by the second one, hopefully they've kind of learned, like, let's just let this happen. Also, we don't have, but it is. And I think, and even with sleep, getting them to sleep on their own, that's a whole one too, to add to that list. But I think I kind of always give the example of the last time we really just allow kids in our mind, in our subconscious brain, right, in this society, to kind of do something on their own without us feeling the need to hover, put a deadline on it, to worry about it, to do all this stuff to make it happen, is when a child's learning to walk. Because they're still a baby, usually. I mean, there are some that walk past 12 months, but they're still very little babies, basically. And we don't put a timeline on that. We don't say,
you better walk by 12 months.
I'm going to spend the next 2 weekends getting little Joey how to learn how to walk, right? We don't do that because we understand that the child is going to eventually walk when they're ready. For the most part, I'm sure that that's probably in some spaces and circles an ordeal too. And there's a worry with all these developmental milestones that we have to, like you said, these haven't been around for that long. They can be a good thing, and they can also be a fear thing for parents. They can be, oh my gosh, they've got to do this by the book. We're just waiting to pathologize.
Oh my gosh,
yes. The right word. We're waiting. Parents are just waiting for that. I was waiting that. I was waiting for my son. Something's going to be wrong. There's just no way I'm going to get out of this without something being wrong, right? And my big thing was autism. And I don't know if it's because I had worked with a lot of children that had autism, but for me as a parent, I was like, I'm going to do everything in my power, which sounds so silly and awful now because what's the worst thing? But anyway, but yeah, so we have to look at all of those things that we just talked about on that list as just another developmental milestones. And I'm very passionate about child-led development. I understand that child-led development and being able to allow for that means that there's going to be a certain amount of privilege. Just like you're talking about, there are schools that these kids, you know, they're going to be putting deadlines on stuff. I think that's a red flag, and I wish I could take down that for every school. I don't think it's right but for whatever reason, they have to do it. And, and you know, you've got parents that work and, you know, the kids got to be able to do some stuff because we've got to get going and we've got to live our lives. And we don't have time to take our kid out in nature and let them spend hours out there and doing, like, we've got to do this and that. And so there's a certain level of privilege to that. But I do think there's ways that you can scaffold it down, and you can have the mindset of letting a child develop at their own pace, no matter where you're at. And it's going to take so much pressure off of you as a parent. You know, if you can just trust, it's about trusting, and it's about living consciously, which is not easy to do in this society. You know, the big myths around potty training are a child should be potty trained by the time they're 3, and that you can do it in a couple weeks. Those are myths. Most children aren't actually ready until age 3. And if you let them do it and give them all the environment, you have to set up an environment that's conducive to them wanting to do it. You know, I always suggest books, stools, toy potties, things like that. But, you know, like my son was 3, and by 3.5, he was pretty well independent. It took about 6 months over the time period from 3 to 3.5. And we know with a lot of pelvic health OTs that I talk to, 6 months is really about how long it takes for them to become independent. I'm talking about without the parent having to put so much. You want to be able to, we already have so much going on. We don't want to have to micromanage this, right? Let them do it on their own. It takes pressure off of us. And it also gives them this beautiful budding independent. That's one of the first times, aside from learning how to walk, it's one of the first milestones that they really are doing separate from us, or they should. And they're intrinsically motivated to do it. That's another thing, is we think that they have to have, you mentioned the Skittles. That's what a lot of parents do. You can guess that I don't suggest extrinsic rewards because it's an intrinsic thing. Like you talked about your second one. All he had to do was watch your big brother do it, and y'all do it, you know, and usually most children, are going to do it because they're intrinsically motivated to do it. It's just something that we just do. You know, they see everybody else do it. They're going to do it eventually. So
absolutely. I mean, beautifully said. I think us recognizing that there is privilege to that, right? We're in America, we're in Western society. So the fact that we even have time and the ability to do all of this is still more amazing than, 80% of the world. But I think the thing about American culture especially is that we're so busy. We're trying to both work for status and career so that we can have things, we can provide comfort, we can buy retirement, we can, provide college, tuition. We're doing all these things for for really, truly our hearts as parents is for the benefit of our children and their children, mostly because we didn't get it or because we did get it and we want to pass it down. But the way we're doing it is we're ignoring the 0 to almost, I'd say, 8 to 10-year-old kid. And then they start, all of that other stuff starts mattering, like when they're in puberty and when they can function and have a conversation and when they start. Not that parents don't love their children or they don't matter to them. It's just that it's impossible to have space to let your child grow and learn when everything is geared towards adult functioning. and this kind of
Mm-hmm.
industrial, like, just,
Yes.
thing. And so I think
Yeah.
about that from a Christian perspective, because in my opinion, the American dream and the way we do all of those things I just said, status, is all anti-gospel messaging. It's all trying to meet your needs with an external thing, because your needs aren't met internally. You don't know that God
Mm-hmm.
loves you and that you're secure in who you are, and that your job is to disciple your kids first, and be in marriage and disciple your children, and then that kind of extrapolates out to your closer community, and then what you do with your job and what you do with your future starts to matter. That's the gospel, in my opinion. And so
Yes.
we've replaced the American dream for the gospel in some ways. And then who suffers the most but women and children?
Yeah.
And I'm not, and men suffer
Absolutely.
too, and that's a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
tangent,
Mm-hmm.
because earlier you said, and women are least supported, and it's like, I would just say both sexes are least supported when it comes to parenting, like, equally in different ways. As a dad, I have no resources and no
Wow.
men, right, to help me be a good father. We've lost that historical
Mm.
passing down of manhood, showing you how to be a dad, showing you how to be a husband, and then that being a communal effort between men. We don't have that either. And that doesn't matter
Such a
if you're
good
white or
point.
black or whatever, Hispanic. There are some cultures who do it better, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely in the American Western culture, I mean, it's just nowhere for nobody. And so I
That's
think
such a good point. Oh, that's so good.
one
My
of the things I
husband,
talk about all the time with men, and again, everything's on a spectrum. But my wife and I were talking. This is probably 6 or 7 months ago, and I was joking, and I was like, if I have to read another mom blog about how hard it is to be a mom or stay at home mom or whatever, I'm going to jump out of a window. And it was because I was really struggling with how hard it was to be a dad, how hard it was to support her through,
oh,
breastfeeding, and only being able to eat like 8 ingredients and staying at home, and she's getting all the things we talked about, that you talked about as a woman, all those pressures and all those societal norms, and you need to go back to work, and you need to do this, and you only got 3 weeks, get it together, all of the things. But what's not talked about is, if you are an active dad who wants to be nurturing and wants to be loving and wants to be a good husband, how difficult it is to sit there and feel extremely helpless most of the time. Your only two options would be, give support when that support's not enough, or go to work so you can make the money so you can provide for all that thing to happen. And so that's kind of the conversation we were having.
my gosh.
And I was saying, one of the things I think that, and again, it's a spectrum. Women experience rejection too. But I was saying, as an active father participant, I would, walk in the living room and to get coffee, and she's like, "I'm tired. The kids have been touching me. Don't touch me right now." And then I go to kiss my oldest son, or my toddler, and he's like, "I want mommy, not you." And I go to kiss my oldest son, and he's like, "Why is mom not here?" And it's like, dang, like, I should just go hang myself in the backyard. Like, I'm not needed. I'm not wanted. Like it's, so that sense of rejection as a man, when you're getting up to go to work and you're active and you're there and available, your kid skins their knee, you're there and you're like, "Hey, I love you, buddy. Let me attune. Let me breathe with you. Let me attach." And they're like, "I want mommy." You're like, dang. Like, I don't think women on a spectrum experience that in the way that a man does. And whatever, feminists hang me up, but I think that experience of, no matter how good of a father you are, your children want their mother when they're hurting. They want their mother to soothe them, because that, they got breastfed, they got held, they were in the womb, like, and that, there's nothing wrong with that. But
Mm-hmm.
as a
Mm-hmm.
man and a parent, you cannot change that no matter how hard you work. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean,
And I don't
you
think men talk
honestly,
about that enough.
no, I'm seriously like, that's amazing that you were able to articulate all of that, because I think it's so true. I think it's so common. And I think that my husband had your exact experience. Like, all of the emotions that you just talked about, he went through. And you're right. I shouldn't just say, I love hearing this perspective, because usually when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking with other moms,
Yep.
other women. That's one of the things that drew me to your page and your work. It's because I was like, yes, we need more men talking about these things. And you're right. My husband is basically, he's just like me, kind of streamlining his own path in parenting. And with not a lot of support, and definitely not male figures, and we could get into even like with his work too,
Oh,
we're running out of mentors at work and workplaces that are like, that are able to truly mentor and pass down wisdom. I think that really affects males, more, maybe, I don't know, I shouldn't be saying more and all that, but
well, I think there are
I
some
love,
differences. I think that's where we have to be careful and we don't have to be careful. It depends on
yeah,
your stance on men and women. It's like,
yeah,
are they equally the same and need all the equal things? I don't see that playing out in psychology or the world.
mm-hmm,
That doesn't mean better though, right?
mm-hmm.
Like there's just a physical factor that my children want my mother.
Yeah,
Want their
yeah,
mother. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Is that all
mm-hmm,
children? No.
mm-hmm.
There's one or two people that are going to be listening going, well, that's not my experience. My husband rejects me all the time. I'm sure that's true. What we're
Yeah.
talking about is not, we can't make the exception the rule, right?
Yeah.
The rule is this is how it generally goes. And if you're in the exception, we'll work around that and we'll talk about that and
Yeah.
see why that happens. But you're talking about 8 out of 10 people. That's their experience. And I hear it every day in my office, except for
Yeah.
men are so terrified to talk about it because they're going to get shamed immediately by the culture. And so it's like, oh, men, step up and be good fathers and be good parents and be attuned and be attached, but also be strong and work hard and don't complain and suck it up. It's like, it's these double binds that women get in the same way where it's like, be a mom and be nurturing and breastfeed, but also have a career and go out and work and get back to work and don't hurt our bottom line. And, it's like both people get it from both sides. And I think the biggest lie that the devil's ever told in our culture is this whole, you got to be against each other, men and women. And we got to find out, how we can, pit each other's, like, I don't know, like suffering Olympics against each other. Instead of asking good questions and saying, hey, healthy male, can you tell me a little bit about what's tough for you? Hey, healthy female, can you tell me about what's tough for you? And let's see how our society is pitting those things against each other.
Yeah, totally. And, on that note, you talk about, I have a boy, I have one boy, and I have become, one of the things I've decided, as a conscious parent is, I'm doing everything in my power to break these rigid gender roles and these constructs of like, this is what it looks like to do this and that.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, I saw a quote, it was on my Instagram feed today that said, boys and men need feminism. And I think what that means is we need to be protecting the emotional life of boys at all costs, because boys, and there's research out there to support this. I mean, I love the work of Mona Delahook.
Yep.
I love the work of Maggie Dent. I love the work of Janet Lansbury. All of them talk about this in detail. Boys are actually more emotional beings than girls. I mean, in terms of like in general, obviously not every single one. I mean, but for the most part, boys, they are, and they need that sensitivity and that safety when it comes to expressing their emotion, more so than even girls at a young age. And so it's really the work of being a conscious parent, if that's something that you're interested in, is really doing everything in your power to make them question and make them be curious and constantly be exposing them to, everything from what they're watching on TV to the books that you read to them, to just how you talk in general, can really help with that. Our society is deep in it, and so it's very much about keeping a lot of that out of the home, and doing the best you can to like help them think critically about things.
Yeah.
But my son is 5, and I'm picking up all kinds of books. We have so many amazing. This pandemic has children's books are just incredible right now. The diversity that is out there, the things that they're depicting boys doing, crying in books. Girls can be whatever they want to be. They can wear pants. They can be doctors. They can be firefighters. I mean, seriously, it just gets to like, there's this like I mean, and some of that seems old school, but like at the end of the day, it's really not. It's
Yeah, we're not
still
that far removed from it.
we're not. And now we've got social media and we've got things at the tip of our fingers all the time that are constantly telling our kids, what to be and how to be. And it's just trying so hard to just kind of, it's just funny because even my son's 5, like I said, he'll be 6 in October. And we were reading a book. I picked out Dress Like a Girl. And I usually don't, the book is about girls being able to dress however they want and be whatever they want. But I usually don't, I stray away from things that are like this, but then when you read it, you realize, but he heard Dress Like a Girl. And the first thing he said, I looked over at his little face was like, he's starting to like have really big facial expressions. He was like a girl. He said, you can dress however you want. And that was just the first page of the book. And I was like, you're right, but let's read it and kind of see, his anyway, but that's just kind of a tangent on all of that. But I think it goes back to what you're talking about, that emotional, like letting boys know, you can have emotions. It's safe to have those,
That was one of the hardest chapters I wrote in the book. One was on masturbation, and then the other was on gender. And I just started it out saying both chapters, like these are the two most difficult chapters because they're so nuanced, but they need to be addressed and talked about. And that's what I tried to focus on with the gender chapter, was expressing, I wasn't getting into LGBTQ or trans or any of that stuff. And I said that up front, like I'm not here to have that debate. What I'm here to talk about is the bigger issue, in my opinion, of us calling girls names, boys names, doing this really rigid stereotype that's leading to way more problems and such a root cause to issues than all the rest of this. We can get into that, but if that's a tiny population, let's get into the huge population of people who are like, you have your hair cut this way, or you cried, or you skinned your knee, or you let that girl beat you in a race, and how that sets the genders up against each other from literal developmental wiring. Like you're literally pairing neuropathways for how boys and girls think about the opposite sex, and you're making their worth and value be about their literal gender and that's the worst thing we can be doing as a society, instead of honoring the differences, not caring if they are different, and then just valuing the person for them as an individual and who they are. And that's what we should be teaching our children. So that chapter was hard to write because I know the pushback I'm going to get. And I know, like, even with you saying Dress Like a Girl, I know that listeners, their first instinct, including mine's like, is this going to be a book about transgenderism? You know what I mean? Like, people are just so on edge about everything. Yeah. But it's
hard to even talk about it.
Yep. But that's why I love the podcast and these conversations. And this is, and I'd say this to everybody listening. Obviously, we're doing a podcast, but what we really need is to be having these conversations with trusted people in our community. Podcasts are great, and I hope that this leads people to have these conversations. But the more important thing is to go, who's my kid? Who are they, and how do I love on them, and how do I get to know them, and how do I need to be as a parent for my child, who's maybe a little sensitive as a boy, or maybe rough and tumble, or maybe is more wants to get dirty as a girl. I mean, those are such stereotyped things because of history. Now, stereotypes are true because they do fit the bell curve most of the time. But I think that's where we get in trouble, is giving worth and value and assignment to things that, are just generalized to all kids. And it's like, well, that's just not true. And my boys are the same way. Like, I'm constantly telling them, dude, you can cry all you want to. Go ahead, cry. Crying's fine. Daddy cries. You've seen daddy cry. Like, crying's fine. You skinned your knee, let's cry. Like, let's do it together. I'll cry with you, whatever. I think where we've swung is parents being like, and you can have all the feelings you want and let them go as far as you want. And once you figure it out, and that's where I think the gentle parenting, although I love most of it, that's where I feel like it gets in trouble, is like there have to be some boundaries and structure, and you have to teach self-regulation, and you have to, as the kid gets older, let them know like what's a no go, and what's, what respect is, and what healthy authority is, and all those kind of things. And then the gentle parenting crowd hears authority or discipline and thinks that means hit them, yell at them, dominate them. And it's like this this constant pendulum from the two sides. And I think what I love about your stuff and why I had you on is that I think we're trying to find the balance in the middle.
Totally.
And go, okay.
And that, yeah.
Go ahead.
Everything you're saying, I could go off on like 15 minutes, but yes. And also on that note, it got me thinking when you were talking, so much of it too is just going with your instincts and your gut on stuff. Like, be aware, know how you want to be as a parent, but also like, everything, we see all these parenting styles and all these scripts and all these things. And it's wonderful that we have resources, but now we have too much, right? We have too much. And that's why I think working with a coach, working with a therapist, getting really serious about what your values are and reclaiming the voice you have as a parent is so important, because you can read all these scripts all day long, but that's not real life. Like, I think the other day, was it today maybe, or even yesterday, it was like I overheard my husband tell my son, you are allowed to feel mad. What you're not allowed to do is
exactly
is hit that. He was about to, like, he's starting to get really not aggressive, and like just developmentally, he's going through an aggressive stage.
Yeah, aggressive. Yeah.
And I heard
even that right there, pause. So even that right there, like, defining terms and labeling things, I think is what's so important, because even we have to give so many caveats to what we mean. Like, a 5-year-old hitting something or slamming the door or throwing something at you is aggressive, but is aggressive necessarily super unhealthy and toxic and something that immediately needs to be crushed and done away with? You know what I mean? Like, no. If it's extremely violent, if he's getting knives out of the drawer and trying to stab you with them, that's a clinical problem we need to work on. But if your 5-year-old's just mad and trying to learn how to express their feelings, they have to be able to mess up to learn how to do it right.
Yeah.
The baseline should be mess up. And when they do it right 1 out of 5 times, we should be like, great. And hopefully over 5 years, they're doing, but I feel like we treat kids like the baseline should be behavior being really good and listening. And then when they mess up 1 or 2 times, it's something to crush and punish and go, you can't do this. But reality is, it's the first time he's been 5 years old.
Yeah.
Like, of course he's going to lose his mind. And if he's a confident, attached, attuned, safe feeling kid, sometimes they're going to lose their mind even more because they feel like they have the space to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really helping parents understand what's typical developmental behavior, and what's, like you said, like getting knives out. And I mean, typically it's like, okay, we can teach some skills here. Where are some skills? And then obviously the modeling. We kind of forget that, like, it's up to us too. So if we are getting mad and yelling and slamming things and acting out in that way, because we do and we will, and again, it's okay, but that is kind of where they're learning. So if you can think about even if it's just one time where you're like, I'm feeling like a little mad because this person I'm driving and this person is just really they're driving way too close and I don't feel safe. I'm going to take a deep breath and I feel better, and they're listening to those things, and hopefully they're, and one day they'll learn to do it themselves, but it's a process, and they do, like you said, the baseline is they're going to just mess up. And then we have to constantly be giving compassion and going, okay, and then not trying to pathologize it, not like realizing, okay, how am I responding? And, because I could be making it a lot worse too, right? Yep. Like, sometimes I hate that quote that's like, they don't need, when a child's melting down, you need to be their calm, not join in their chaos. And it's like, that's like the hardest thing to do. But but if you can do it, if you can, it is a little bit of a superpower, that co-regulation, that attunement that you're talking about. It really is powerful. And we don't have to do it perfectly, and we don't have to do it all the time. No. But that is how they learn, and if we come at them very aggressive and we shame them for all those behaviors, then of course it's going to start just escalating, because they don't feel safe. And then that's where parents really start to get like, when the kids get older, like, ooh, we don't have these like foundational skills that we need. Like you said, that 0 to 8 is so important for that it's unreal.
And we do we do the least of all of that ages in America.
Yeah.
Like we teach the least of emotional regulation in the years where they need it the most.
Yeah. And what kept coming up for me, I know we're getting close to time, but
oh no, you're fine. We can go to 1:30. We got plenty of time.
Okay. One of the things that came up for me when you were talking about this, kids saying, oh, the girl ran and or you got beat by a girl, and you were kind of talking about all that. One of the things that I'm so passionate about is play-based learning, unstructured play. And then if you couple that with time in nature, kids are naturally getting all of this, because what nature doesn't do, what you can't do, everything is an equal playing field in nature.
Yep.
There's nothing that's going to come up in nature that's going to say, well, the boy has to do this and the girl has to do this. And it's a beautiful thing watching kids. And I facilitated a nature-based program for 3 to 5 year olds, just a little half-day program last year. And it was, these kids are getting that emotional regulation. They're getting, they're learning.
Filthy.
How, do what?
Filthy.
They're getting really dirty.
Yeah.
It's amazing. 9 times out of 10, if they had a chance to get in the mud, they would get in the mud. 9 times out of 10. But then they'd learn, right? I got in the mud and then I had to get cleaned up later, and they remembered that feeling, right? So they're just building all those sensory awareness, those sensory skills, and then learning that they do have all these opportunities that everybody else has. Boys and girls are together, they're doing the same things, and they can do as much or as little as they want in nature and in a play-based setting. And I think if we had more play-based opportunities and unstructured learning opportunities for children in those age ranges, we would have some better outcomes. I truly believe that. But what we're seeing is these academics, kindergarten is now pre-K 4, first grade is now kindergarten. And then we've got competitive sports happening at 5 years old. And so,
for those of y'all that didn't see me, I fell out of the computer screen for a second.
We could have a separate episode on organized sports and competitive sports.
You just step all over all the toes.
I know. People are going to come at me I was a college softball player, by the way. So I have a little bit of.
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit because I lived it. I lived a toxic sports culture. It's not all toxic. Sports has wonderful things. But anyway, what I'm saying is when we're talking, let's go back to 0 to 8. They need all the opportunities. They need all the things. They don't need to be playing baseball year round at that age. They need more
diversity.
They need more unstructured activities. In my opinion.
Have you seen or followed 1,000 Hours Outside, I think?
Yeah.
Have you seen her? She has the book, I think she just published it, called When the Street Lights Come On or something like that. Have you seen that? Yeah, my wife's been all about that here recently.
Yeah. She had Kim John Payne on. I don't know. He's like when I always encourage parents to find like one really good person that they just resonate with. You read their book, his book, Simplicity Parenting, I recommend to anybody that it just, every single line just resonates. And he wrote an entire book with a couple of other youth sports professionals on just sports, youth sports.
What's that called? Do you know?
It's called Parenting. I've got it in my bookcase. Smart Parenting in a Toxic Youth Sports World or something like that. It's by Kim John Payne. And they actually interview Louise is the guy, I can't remember his last name, on that podcast, on the 1,000 Hours Outside podcast.
Gotcha.
So you can go on there and look and find it too. She and Jenny interviewed them, and it was really, really good.
That's awesome.
But that book's really great for anybody that's interested in that.
Yeah, it's good. No, I mean, you're right though. That's the other thing we've completely taken out of our society is just that ability for kids to play, and I think that's what I want parents to ask themselves, and maybe for our generation and up, the ship sailed, but I'm hoping for the next generation of parents, whether it's sexual abuse or technology or outside, that they can really ask themselves, what is it that I value about humanity? And what is it that we did an episode on this a while back, like what is success? Because I think the biggest thing is, like you said, I think parents are really wanting to do what is going to provide their children with the most success possible. But I'm not necessarily sure that everybody stopped to think about like what that is and define that and what that actually means and how that's playing out in their own life. Because
Yeah.
is success having two jobs and having two incomes and having more vacations and money, or is success like our children being emotionally intelligent, knowing who they are, having a healthy boundaries, being able to be confident in whatever it is that they're doing, have a good relationship with us for God's sakes, where they can come to us and feel safe to communicate and be angry and be sad and ask questions. Like to me, that's success. If my boys are 20 and we have a great relationship and they choose to do, I don't care what they choose to do, and they're happy and they're engaged with me and they're in relationships and they're loving the Lord, like I don't care. I'm going to call that a success. Now that's easier said than done, right? I mean, I think that's where the regulation and the insight in the community comes in, because it's like I can say all of this stuff and we're talking all these ideals and I screw it all up and I get afraid and I react out of fear and I'm like, maybe I need to tear your butt up so you don't smoke crack when you're 17. It's like you go through all those things, but it's like that's where the regulation and getting to the truth and having like all the resources at your disposal allows you for the majority of the time to do the right thing and to hold the line to what is true and what you feel is what your kids need. Because every time that I've compromised that out of fear or out of what somebody else would think, I regret it to my bones,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
it's just the worst. When
and it's a feeling, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why I'm so like, let's get back to helping parents listen to that feeling, right? Like it's not fair that we're putting all these pressures and these ideals and these like you said, not getting clear at what that individual family's version of success is, or knowing what their values are.
Yeah.
And we've put all this, and then when we do that, we're not listening to ourselves, and we're going to end up feeling yucky. It's like you said earlier that with your first that y'all had tried, or sleep training didn't feel right. That's one of the first times parents start realizing that society has put so much, like it's one of the first times I think that parents start realizing, oh, this is what everybody says I should be doing, and this isn't what I'm feeling is right. For me as a parent, that was my first time with the sleep training. It was like, oh, it's immediately something's wrong. Immediately we have to do something to fix it. Immediately we have to pay someone to, do something, when it's like, what is actually going back to conscious? Who is this child you have in front of you? What is actually happening? 9 times out of 10, it's typical infant sleep. And it sucks. Dr. Sears talks about nighttime parenting. It sucks. But that's why parents need support.
It's also, yes. It's also the shortest period of your kid's life.
Yeah, but it feels like it's not.
It feels like forever. Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, me and my husband brought home our son, and let's go to bed,
Yeah, we'll wake him up in 3 hours and breastfeed him. And it's like, yeah, right.
And there goes 3 years of, and so it's like, what's realistic? What's normal? What feels good? If it doesn't feel good, usually parents will tell you that crying out or doing anything not just crying out, that's just one example. Doing anything, like you said, of that just doesn't, you just get that niggling. of like something. I know, I probably, this isn't what I should be doing. This doesn't feel right. This isn't what's best.
I think that, and I hear you on that. I think I'm going to just thread the needle. I think that trusting your gut in those areas, there's an attachment and an attunement and a biological response to pain in your baby and suffering in your child that you should definitely trust your gut on, because and check in with yourself and go, why am I doing this and what's best? I think where I hesitate on the trust your gut thing is that we have so much trauma that a lot of people's initial instinct, their gut instinct, is actually to hit or to yell, and that actually feels like the right thing. And it's I know what you're saying is trust your gut when you're being a mindful, conscious parent. Like when you start building the skill and the awareness of being mindful and conscious, then you can start trusting your gut and that instinct a little more because you've built that in. But where I hesitate with people is like, you got to get there. Because if you, and that's a big psychological thing on Instagram. It's like, just trust your feelings, trust your guts. You'll know if your partner's this or your child's this. And I'm like, oh, like that's going real bad if you haven't done any work and you have no accountability and no person who is helping you see who you are. You know, if you're just trusting your only gut and it's just you, to me, that goes bad real quick.
Yeah. And then I think
does that make sense?
It does make sense. And
you can push back.
I can go both ways on that. I mean, I think too, it's like you said, like the result. What is the result? If this isn't getting you the result that's best, you're going to feel it at some point. Like even if your gut is, you know, a trauma reaction, which my gut trauma reactions were to yell, I've started detecting bodily sensations and I'm starting to connect them to emotions. Yeah. But I was cut off from all that. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But I also knew that yelling didn't feel right. Yep. Like my gut reaction was to yell, but I always felt really crappy afterwards. You know, so it's not just in the moment, but it's also, if this isn't working, and this is something that's happening over and over again, you're getting reacted over and over again, that's a pain point that can be addressed. Yeah. You can help yourself and get support with. I think anything that we do that comes from a trauma response is going to feel yucky eventually.
I agree.
You know, I think, and that's what finally, there's got to be something that sits us over the top to get that.
Keep going.
I think there's got to be an event, and I would be interested to see what you say about this, seeing so many people in your practice. I feel like there's got to be an event that happens to make yourself become more aware. For me, it was the depression. I was acting awful. I was depressed. I was crying all the time. I felt rage. I was yelling. I mean, and that was like, this is not who I am. This isn't the parent I want to be. Something is not right. I've got to get help. Right. And so that's what prompted me to do that. I think we have a lot of people that just kind of, you know, a lot of unhealed humans walking around. And they're not, like you said, aware of that this is actually a trauma response, or that you're reacting over something that, you know, and then it can get really... But so much of mine was tied to childhood stuff. Yeah. So I realized that.
Yeah, I think so many things to say. We could have I'm going to have you back on in like a couple months and have just a bunch of other conversations. I think for me, that's why, for my Christian listeners, that's why discipleship is so important. And discipleship. So you said you got to pick your person. So I love Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson. All of their stuff's great, and Tina's going to come. Dr. Bryson's going to come on in October, so I'm super excited about that. So
no way!
So excited for that episode. If you follow me, you've heard me talk about those books forever. So you know she'll be on. We're going to talk about some awesome stuff. But the point is, and I don't know what their faith background is either. I know there's a lot of people that I went to Fuller with that have worked under them and worked with them and all that. But my point is that discipleship discipline means to teach, right? The root word is disciple, which means to teach. So when we parent, we have to think about if my goal in discipline and punishment are two totally different things. But if my goal is, Scripture says, to discipline our children, right? that means that I'm to teach them, I'm to lead them, I'm to guide them. Then that means we have to ask, what is it that they're capable of learning in this developmental stage that they're in? Right. And so that means we have to understand the developmental stage of our child to be able to be a good discipler of our children. So it's not enough to have a 2-year-old who, my favorite example is the kid in the high chair dropping their food on the floor. Like we've all experienced it, right? Every single parent, let's say 98% of parents, because there's always outliers. I don't like ultimatums. 98% of parents have experienced the toddler taking the spaghetti and dropping it on the floor, taking the food and throwing it on the floor, taking the spoon and dropping it. And you're just like, oh my God, if I have to pick up another thing, I'm going to, some parents slap their kid's hand and tell them no.
Yeah.
And their idea is, this is not helpful. This is not a good behavior. So I will discipline you, right? I will teach you that dropping your food on the floor is unhelpful and not what you should do. All of the neuroscience in the world would tell you that 2-year-old, or well, actually it's way younger, 12 to 16-month-old, has no concept of learning right from wrong and knowing why they shouldn't drop the food on the floor. It is a developmental stage that all children go through, because they're learning object permanence. They're trying to figure out what this food does. They're trying to control texture. They're trying to figure, they're doing all these things. They're not thinking, I'm going to drop this food on the floor just to tick mom off or make it inconvenient.
Right.
And so what happens is that parents slap their hand and they lecture them and they tell them not to. And then after a few months, the child stops doing it and the parent goes, oh, look, they learned. Yeah. What they don't know is that the other parent who understands the developmental stage goes, this is just inconvenient. I'm going to keep redirecting. And in about the same timeline, the kid stops doing it.
Yeah.
Right? So in both scenarios, it was a 2 to 3 month developmental stage that every child goes through, that one parent punishes and slaps and hurts the kid because they don't want him to do it and they want him to learn not to do it. The other parent doesn't do anything but kind of guide them and be inconvenienced. And lo and behold, both children don't do it anymore. And I think so many things in our culture are like that, where people are like, oh, this punishment worked. It taught them and they stopped. And somebody needs to go, hey, I don't know if you know this, but they're going to do that. And then they're going to stop doing it regardless of what you do, pretty much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to teach people is like, I get that you want to have something to do. I get that you feel all this shame and all this anxiety and all this, like, me as a parent's responsible for all these behaviors and outcomes, and so I got to do something. But so much of, especially little kids from 0 to 5, is the doing that you need to do is just walk beside them, nurture them, love on them, make them feel safe, and redirect and guide them on what's not healthy. But they're not going to be able to learn that lesson in the way that you think about learning.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of just, when coaching parents in that age range that have children in that age range, is exactly that, is what's developmentally happening in the brain. What stages are they going through? That's why it doesn't make sense to potty train a 2.5-year-old, because what does a 2.5-year-old start doing? What does a 2.5-year-old start going? No, 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 no. No, that's the first time they start saying no, right? So then that's when parents are pressured to potty train their kid.
And pressured to teach their child not to say no.
Yeah.
After you've said no for like a year to everything too. It's like, you know what I mean? Instead of saying not for Grady or not for Jude or hey, we're going to redirect, people are like, no, no. And then the kids start saying it. You're like, why are you talking back? And it's like, oh my gosh, you literally taught your kid to do this for a year before they can say it, and now they're saying it, and you're upset and seeing it as a behavioral issue.
Yeah, and that again, it goes back to the word conscious. In my mind, conscious parenting is looking at the child right there, without the need to put all this expectation behind it. Because what causes so much parental anguish and distress is that expectations are not met. That is the biggest reason. And that goes into, as a therapist, starts spiraling into shame. into feelings of not good enough, into feelings of comparison. Everybody's doing things better than me. My child's not here. It's the catalyst for so many
Yep.
problems and mental health of parents. And so when you look at conscious parenting, The Conscious Parent by Shefali Tansbury was one of the first books I read besides Simplicity Parenting. Those are my two where I just was like, and she's very spiritual. She's not faith-based, but everything's very spiritual. And it just all just really, every sentence just, resonated with me. And you're really, it brings the joy back into parenting. That's so much of what I try to do with families is let's bring joy back. Let's figure out. And so much of that is this is the kids you got, and this is where they're at. And a lot of times it's not going to be where you think they're supposed to be at.
You tell me when it is. That'd be a great thing to do. I mean,
it's so hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It is so hard. And it is, I mean, even just the way they play with things. Right. I've got a boy who I have constantly always set up all these wonderful art activities and things. And I've always had just all things available to him. 9 times out of 10, he's throwing things. He's, it's all, I mean,
he wants to break everything, right?
Yeah. He's just and it's like, okay, I'm just like, this is obviously what he's needing. So I've set up all this stuff and he's not playing it, and that's okay because it's all,
Yep. It's hard. It's so hard. My oldest didn't color until he was like 5. And my second one, he just loves to color. He colors in lines. Like he'll cut stuff out. I remember being like we were like one of the only boys, and there were like 5 or 6 girls in our little group. And man, they would have all these parties and all these like play dates where they would like do stuff for Christmas or Thanksgiving or holidays, and they're cutting stuff out and dipping chocolate in strawberries in chocolate and making these little things. And my oldest was just like a wrecking ball. It was like every time they started inviting us, like, well, if you want us to just come over and tear everything up in your house while your daughters are sitting at a table doing art for an hour and a half, we'll do it. But like, that's what's going to happen is I'm going to be outside with him. Y'all are going to be talking as moms and hanging out and dads and parents, and me and Grady and then the one other boy will be outside like hitting a stick against a tree, and again, that's not for everybody. That's not how all boys and girls are, but it's a lot of them.
It really is. There is developmentally, from what I've seen as a therapist and just facilitating programs, there is. I mean, boys a lot of times are, and like I said, not all the time, but yes. And it's like, okay, this is where we're at. And this is what we're doing, and it's not going to last forever.
Nope.
But I've got to meet them where they're at. Because if I keep doing this pushback in my head of how things are supposed to be, I'm going to constantly be disappointed. And not just him, but myself. And he's going to internalize that as disappointment. I think boys struggle with that. I think that happens with boys a lot. And it's not that parents are like actively trying to disappoint their boys. That's not what it is at all. There are so many but boys, they struggle with executive functioning, even in older age. I was at the grocery store the other day, and there was a mom with her 2 boys, and he was probably like 9 or 10. And the mom she had her list out, and she's like, okay, do you not see the cheese right there that's on the list, the American cheese? You've picked that out like 100 times. Like, gosh. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, I'm in solidarity with you. Like I get it, but like it's like we place it, like we think they're supposed to be able to do this. And a lot of times boys just, they're not there yet, and goes with girls too. There's all kinds of things with girls too that we could talk about with
Definitely.
that. But
we're both boy parents, so we're in camaraderie about that for sure.
Yeah.
And all the boy moms on here listening, you know what we're talking about. And all the girl moms, we love you too, but we don't have girls, so we can't talk about it as nuanced today.
No.
We'll do that. We have other episodes on being a girl parent with girl moms, so you can listen to those.
Oh yeah.
I think it's interesting, just the dynamic and all of that, and I'm really appreciative for you to come on and talk about it. And we'll schedule. I know we were going to talk about corporal punishment in Arkansas, and we will do that. So we're going to reschedule. And I mean, I feel like this conversation was great, and I'd like to take a whole conversation. So just to kind of give a teaser, I'll tell the date on the next podcast, but we'll have you rescheduled. So give a teaser about kind of what you do in Arkansas about corporal punishment in schools, and then we'll kind of talk about that on the next time you come.
Yeah. So I am on the board of Arkansans Against School Paddling. We still have corporal punishment is physical punishment that is still allowed in many schools. Lots of times they use a large wooden paddle to do it. There's no like trainings on giving these paddlings or anything like that. Just kind of whoever they usually designate a person to do it. 19 states. You're in Louisiana, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Louisiana as well. It's still legal in some school districts, not all. Like it just depends on the school district that you're in. And so we are working with, we work with legislation, we work with parents, we educate parents, we put out videos. The U.S. to End the Hitting of Children is a really great resource. And we work with them and working with legislation to basically end corporal punishment in schools and give schools alternative actions to discipline children in schools. So more, those alternative methods that are more, aligned with the latest neuroscience, and that
I'll say it, non-abusive.
Non-abusive, and yeah.
Because, and we'll get into that the next time you come. But
yeah.
I think it's a great conversation to have and to be had. This was probably, I was working for the Methodist Children's Home at the time, so it was like probably 8 or 9 years ago when I think Caddo was trying to do away with corporal punishment here, our parish, and several news sources reached out to me, and I think I did a write-up on the pros and cons and all that stuff, and so we can talk about that later. But
yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing to me that with all that we know and all that's going on, and with the historical trauma and the changes in culture that children have, that we would be okay with literal strangers who we're not in community with hitting our children for a behavior that we don't have any authority over, saying whether it was or wasn't right, wasn't enough, was for a reason. Like, there's so many things that go into deciding to do that. Right. The fact that it's just on the table is so crazy. I mean,
and we'll get into the risk of sexual abuse and kind of the correlation between that and bodily autonomy. And then this little nugget I will leave with is that it disproportionately affects children of color and disabled children.
Absolutely.
So statistically speaking, they're the ones that are getting hit the most.
Yeah. What's the stat on that? Do you know?
I don't have exact stats, but I can come next time with some like specific stats.
Yeah, I'll look some up too.
It out. Yeah. There are stats, and that's the thing too, is we're not sure how well. This is just what's been recorded.
Of course.
The director of our program, of our organization, when he came on, he was a big researcher at the U of A, and he learned that there wasn't even anybody keeping up with it.
No, of course not.
And so that was a huge red flag. And so,
yeah, I'll tell my junior high paddling story whenever and my kindergarten paddling story. I got both of those.
No.
Oh yeah, I did some EMDR around that this morning. Not that specific thing, but they all, all of that stuff links in together. And man, it's just yeah. I was 5. Yep.
No.
But I'll tell that story.
I mean, and I'll tell you my husband's, because it's strange, and his viewpoint on it is also strange. So
it'll be interesting.
But yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about, because he was a teenager, and it was like opting for that versus D-hole or something. And
oh yeah, that's what I did. I opted for the paddling. Yeah, it was 2 weekends suspension or taking the paddling. Yep.
That's how it is.
I was like, go on and get that stick out, because I'm not going to detention for 2 weekends. I'm too social. But that wasn't right. I was a kid, and that should have never been my choice. But we'll get into that anyway. So thank you for coming on. This has been phenomenal.
Yay,
I could talk to you
thank
for like 10
you.
hours about all of this.
I know.
So I'll get Sunny with you and we'll reschedule. But thank y'all for listening. Thank you for, just always being followers of mine. Check out Chelsey Harrington on Instagram. What's your website?
Well, I'm through Impact Life Coaching.
Okay.
I can send that if you have show notes or anything.
Yeah.
But I'm under her there. But you can also find it on Chelsey Harrington Coaching on my Instagram handle. You can find it through my link.
Yeah, and I'll tag you. It'll go live Friday, so we have a pretty quick turnaround.
Okay.
So I'll tag you to all that, and then we'll get Sunny to get you a date. But thanks guys for listening. God bless, and have a good week.